I smiled down at my son, tucking the blanket around his small frame. He always asked for scary stories before bed, something that both amused and troubled me. Kids usually want to escape from fear, not seek it out. But not my boy. Henry was different. "All right," I said, sitting on the edge of his bed, the soft creak of the old wood filling the room. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that wraps around you like a thick, oppressive blanket. Outside, a steady wind blew against the window pane, whistling through the cracks like a distant, ghostly wail. "Are you sure you want to hear this one?" I asked, giving him one last out. But his eyes were wide, expectant, gleaming with curiosity in the faint glow of his bedside lamp. "Yeah, I'm sure. Tell me the scariest one you've got." I leaned back, took a deep breath, and let the memory I had long buried rise to the surface. "Okay, but don't say I didn't warn you. This is a story I haven't told anyone before, not even your mother. It's a story about something that happened to me when I was around your age." Henry's eyes widened even more. The fact that the story was personal, it always made it more real to him. It was a summer evening, warm but with a slight chill creeping in, the kind that clings to your skin like a whisper of something unseen. I was 10. We lived in a house at the edge of town near the woods. Not as big as this place, but old. Real old. My room was upstairs, right at the back where the wind would howl through the trees at night. It was the kind of house that always made strange noises, groans and creaks, like it had a life of its own. Every now and then, you'd hear a soft knock at the walls or footsteps on the stairs when no one was supposed to be walking. My parents always brushed it off, said it was the house settling. But that night it felt different. I remember lying in bed staring up at the ceiling, listening. At first it was just the usual, branches tapping against the window, the floorboards creaking under some invisible weight. I tried to ignore it like I always did. But then came the sound that changed everything. A faint scratching. It was subtle at first, like a mouse or some other small animal, but it wasn't coming from the walls or the attic. It was coming from under my bed. My heart started racing, but I told myself it was nothing. Just the wind or maybe something brushing against the house from outside. Then the scratching grew louder, more insistent. I pulled the covers up to my chin, my breath catching in my throat. I didn't dare look under the bed. I didn't even want to move. I just lay there, frozen, listening as the scratching went on and on, like someone or something was trying to get out. I don't know how long it lasted. Could have been minutes, could have been hours. But at some point, it just stopped. The silence that followed was almost worse. It was thick, heavy, like the air itself had been sucked out of the room. I couldn't move, couldn't even think. All I could do was stare at the ceiling, waiting for something to happen. Then I heard it. A voice. Low. Barely a whisper. It called my name. At first I thought I was imagining it. But then it came again. This time, clearer. A hushed, almost pleading voice. Daniel. My blood turned cold. No one was supposed to be in the house. My parents were downstairs, probably asleep. But this voice, it wasn't theirs. It wasn't even human, not exactly. There was something off about it, something that made my skin crawl. I couldn't stay there. I had to move. Slowly, I slid out of bed, careful not to make a sound. The floor was cold under my feet as I crept toward the door. The voice came again, louder this time, closer. Daniel, come here. My heart pounded in my chest, but I didn't stop. I reached for the door handle, my hand trembling. Just as I was about to pull it open, the voice called out again, this time from directly beneath the bed. I turned, staring at the shadowy space under my bed. My heart was in my throat, every nerve in my body screaming for me to run. But I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I dropped to my knees and peered under the bed. Henry gasped, his small hands clutching the blanket. "What was under there, Dad?" he asked, his voice hushed but excited. I leaned in a little closer, lowering my voice. "I'll get to that. But remember, this is just a story, okay?" Henry nodded, though I could see the fear starting to creep in. Good. That's exactly where I needed him. The space beneath the bed was dark, darker than it should have been. It was like the shadows were thicker there, as though something was sucking the light out of the room. And in that darkness, I saw something move. At first, it was just a shape, a vague outline, barely distinguishable. But then I saw them. Eyes. Two small, gleaming eyes staring back at me from the shadows. I couldn't make out the rest of its form, just those eyes, watching me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. The voice came again, this time directly in my ear, though the thing hadn't moved. "Daniel, come closer." I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I did the only thing I could think of. I screamed. My father burst into the room seconds later, flipping on the light. The thing under the bed was gone, vanished like it had never been there. But I knew what I had seen, what I had heard. I told him everything, choking on my words, my fear still clinging to me like a second skin. He didn't believe me, of course, said it was just a bad dream, that I was imagining things. But I knew better. And from that night on, the voice kept coming back. Night after night, it would whisper to me from the darkness, always calling my name, always asking me to come closer. I tried to ignore it, tried to pretend it wasn't there, but the more I ignored it, the more insistent it became. I stopped sleeping, stopped eating. My parents grew worried, took me to doctors, therapists, but none of them could help. None of them understood. They didn't hear the voice. Only I did. Then one night, everything changed. The voice didn't come from under the bed. It came from somewhere else, somewhere much closer, from my closet. Henry's eyes widened, his breath hitching. "The closet?" he whispered. "Yep," I said, leaning in closer. "The closet." That night I was ready. I didn't know what it wanted, but I was going to find out. When the voice called my name, I didn't run. I didn't hide. I walked straight to the closet and threw the door open. It was empty, completely empty. But the voice was still there, still whispering. "Daniel, closer." I stepped into the closet, my heart pounding. The door creaked as it swung shut behind me, plunging me into darkness. And then I saw it, the same eyes gleaming at me from the back of the closet, watching, waiting. This time I didn't scream. This time I reached out. My hand brushed against something cold, something hard and smooth, like the surface of a mirror. And then, before I could pull away, the darkness swallowed me whole. I paused, letting the silence hang between us, thick and suffocating. "What happened next?" Henry whispered, his voice trembling. I smiled, leaning back. "That's a story for another time." That night, as I left Henry's room and closed the door softly behind me, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The house was too quiet, the shadows too thick. And as I walked down the hall, I thought I heard it again. That same voice, low and pleading, calling from somewhere deep in the house. "Daniel, come closer." As I stood there, frozen in the hallway, the faint echo of my name whispered through the air again, tugging at my mind like an old memory I wished I could forget. I shook it off, reminding myself it was just the story lingering in my head, just my own voice playing tricks on me. But that didn't explain why the shadows seemed to cling to the corners of the hallway, or why I felt that same pull, the same icy grip I had felt all those years ago when I stood before the closet. I forced myself to keep walking. "This is nothing," I told myself. "Just your imagination." Yet my imagination hadn't felt this real in years. I flicked off the hallway light, letting the darkness take over as I made my way downstairs. In the kitchen, I poured myself a glass of water, trying to shake the lingering tension that had wrapped itself around me. The house creaked, old wood groaning beneath the shifting wind outside, just as it always had. But then it happened again. That voice. "Daniel." I nearly dropped the glass. The sound wasn't in my head this time. It wasn't the echo of an old memory. It was real, and it wasn't coming from upstairs. It was coming from the closet just across the kitchen. For a long moment I stood there, paralyzed, staring at the closed door. The same closet where we kept the coats and shoes. The same closet that, until that very moment, had never bothered me. But now I couldn't look away. It was like I was back in that old house, standing in front of the closet, hearing the voice that no one else believed in. I took a deep breath, trying to regain control. I reminded myself that this was impossible. It was just the story, a bedtime story I told my son, nothing more. I was letting it get to me, letting it stir up old fears. I had outgrown this. I had buried this a long time ago. But the voice came again, louder this time, more insistent. "Daniel, come closer." My blood ran cold. I had to move, had to do something, anything, to break the spell this voice had on me. I couldn't let myself fall back into that old fear. I was a grown man now. I wasn't a child anymore. I approached the closet door slowly, the sound of my bare feet soft against the cool kitchen tile. My heart hammered in my chest as my hand hovered over the doorknob. Every instinct screamed at me not to open it, to turn around and walk away. But something deeper, a darker curiosity, pushed me forward. What would I see if I opened it? The voice didn't come this time. There was only silence as I stood there, trembling. I had to know. I turned the knob slowly and pulled the door open. The closet was empty. Of course it was. My breath came out in a sharp exhale, relief washing over me. I let out a soft, nervous laugh, feeling ridiculous for having let the story get under my skin like this. I was just spooking myself. But then something shifted at the back of the closet. A faint, almost imperceptible movement, like the air was bending, warping ever so slightly. My breath caught in my throat. I blinked, shaking my head, convinced I was imagining things. It had to be a trick of the light, a shadow cast by the moon through the kitchen window. I reached out, hand trembling, ready to shut the door and forget the whole thing. But before I could, I heard it again, louder, clearer. "Daniel." The whisper was so close now, as though it wasn't coming from the closet at all, but from right behind me. I spun around, expecting to see... what? I don't even know. But there was nothing. Just the dark, empty kitchen. I stood there, my pulse thundering in my ears. I had to snap out of this. I had to move, to get away from this damn closet. Without thinking, I slammed the closet door shut and backed away, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The voice was still in my head, echoing over and over, but I refused to listen to it anymore. I turned, ready to head upstairs and check on Henry, ready to put this madness behind me. But then I froze. There in the middle of the kitchen was something I hadn't noticed before. A faint, wet trail on the floor, leading from the base of the closet to the hallway. It was subtle, almost invisible in the moonlight, but it was there, and it was fresh. I followed the trail with my eyes, my stomach turning as it led toward the stairs, toward Henry's room. My mind raced, every nerve screaming at me to run, to get to my son. I rushed up the stairs 2 at a time, my heart pounding in my chest as I burst into Henry's room. He was still there, still tucked under the blanket, fast asleep. I let out a shaky breath, the relief washing over me so hard it nearly knocked me off balance. I leaned against the doorframe, staring at him for a moment, letting my heart slow. Just the story. Just my mind playing tricks. That's all this was. But then I saw it. At the foot of his bed, barely visible in the dim light of his bedside lamp, was the same wet trail I had seen in the kitchen. A trail leading from the door to his bed. I took a slow step forward, the floor creaking under my weight. Henry stirred but didn't wake. As I reached the bed, I felt it before I saw it. Cold air, sharp and biting, coming from underneath the bed. I crouched down, heart hammering, and peered into the shadows. The darkness beneath the bed was thick, almost impenetrable. But there, just at the edge of the shadow, I saw them. 2 gleaming eyes. watching me, waiting. And then, in the faintest whisper, barely louder than a breath, I heard the voice again. "Daniel, come closer." I stood there, frozen in time, staring into those eyes that seemed to hold a dark eternity. I should have run, should have grabbed Henry and gotten us both out of the house. But I didn't. I stayed there, crouched by his bed, staring into the void beneath it, caught between terror and disbelief. It felt like an eternity passed in that moment, the air thick with tension, my mind spiraling. But then, something shifted. Henry stirred in his sleep again, his small body turning under the blankets. The movement snapped me back to reality, and I blinked, pulling my gaze away from the bed. Whatever had been there was gone now. The room was still, quiet. I stood up slowly, my legs shaking beneath me. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't let this darkness take hold of us again. Without another word, I scooped Henry up into my arms, careful not to wake him, and carried him out of the room. I moved through the house with purpose, not daring to look back as I made my way downstairs and out the front door into the cool night air. We didn't return to that house again.